three parts. The very first one will be your statement. After that, you will be questioned by Sylvie Kaufmann from Le Monde and Françoise Nicolas from IFRI. And in the third part, I will take some questions by the people outside the room, but who are asked to follow you carefully. And I'm pretty sure I will do so. Minister, let me introduce you very briefly. You became External Affairs Minister of India in 2019 after a remarkable diplomatic career, because as we discussed, you served, for instance, many years ago in Moscow, but you were ambassador to China, you were ambassador to the US, and you were also a foreign secretary. And you found time to write a book, which was published in 2020, The Indian Way, which is a reflection about the option for India in terms of foreign policy. So as I said, you are visiting Paris in a very particular context. You insisted, and your ambassador as well, on the importance of the relation between France and India, and that's why we decided to title this conference, How Does India See France? And you participated in a ministerial forum for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific region. It is for sure a priority for the EU French presidency. And it is certainly a topic on which there are many expectations in Europe regarding the initiative taken by India. So for all these reasons, we are very happy to have you this afternoon at IFRI. And as I said, I would let you the floor for 20, 25, 30 minutes, as you want. So the floor is yours, and thank you again for coming to IFRI. If you want to go there, you will be more comfortable.
Director Thomas Kumar, dear friends, it's a great pleasure to be at IFRI. The work that you and other institutions in France do provides valuable insights into French and European perspectives of our changing world, especially important because of the role that Europe and France are expected to play in the world. As India and France seek to deepen the partnership and set higher ambitions for their relationship, including in the Indo-Pacific region, there is a clear need to intensify the conversation between and with these strategic communities in both countries. I'm glad that IFRI is developing institutional partnerships in India. I'm also pleased to share my thoughts on how India sees France. It is particularly appropriate that I am doing so following a bilateral meeting with Foreign Minister Le Drian, Defense Minister Pale, and the Indo-Pacific Ministerial Forum for which I came here. These occasions capture the strategic priorities that provide a compelling framework of what I believe is a truly unique partnership between India and France. So this question, how does India see France? Well, succinctly put, I would say as a major power with a global outlook and an independent mindset, one that is central to multipolarity and rebalancing. Equally important, one that is extremely responsive to India's concerns and priorities. That has a long history as a trusted partner, and one which is becoming even more relevant as we jointly address contemporary and emerging challenges. That we have now entered an era of turbulence gives this partnership a still greater salience in international relations. The world is today in the midst of multiple crises, including one in Europe. It is taking place against the backdrop of profound geopolitical, geoeconomic, and technological changes. The widespread disruption of the pandemic has sharpened, perhaps even accelerated these trends. Taken together, these developments have generated new challenges to the international order. We no longer have the comfort of the familiar. In response, all nations are reappraising priorities, strategies, relationships, and even strategic geography. We scramble every day to adapt to the rapid changes in the environment. Often, long-standing assumptions have to be revisited. In this era of growing uncertainty, polities are searching for reliable and resilient partners. Those with shared values and common vision obviously fit the bill more perfectly. That is certainly the case with France and India. Especially in the last 2 decades, India has transformed many of its relationships in its extended neighborhood as much as at the global level. Our relationship with France, though, is one that bridges multiple generations. History is certainly an asset for this particular account. What is now happening is a shared endeavor to take it to a still higher level. I can assert with genuine confidence that it is the strongest now since our journey as an independent nation began 75 years ago. Through the tumult of our times, India's relations with France have continued to move forward on a steady and clear course. It is a relationship that has been free from sudden shifts and surprises that we sometimes see in other cases. Indeed, these ties have continuously adapted to change and come out stronger for that. In India, there is a great sense of trust and confidence in the relationship. It is deeply institutionalized and benefits from a strong political consensus on its importance. I believe that we have seen the same here in France. There is, of course, the shared belief in democracy and universal human values. We both have an abiding faith in independent thinking and a deep conviction that our interests are best served in a multipolar order. Our shared faith in national capabilities has its roots in our respective conception of ourselves. It speaks of a belief in our civilizational heritage and worldview that has run through the changing course of our histories. It produces what I would call a distinctly unique way of looking at global developments. When it comes to our relationship, it has instilled confidence that we will intuitively relate to each other without letting other influences shape our choices. As India sees France, there's a lot in history that positively shapes its perceptions. There are current developments too that add to the nature and quality of our convergence. As we look ahead, shared interests and common beliefs are creating an ambitious agenda for our expanding partnership. Allow me to explain that with some examples. Let's start with the basics. An independent India, too, had the ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity as its foundational principles of the Republic. These have guided our respective approaches to governance and to society. Whether it is the objective of creating a more just and empowered society or meeting challenges like terrorism, there is a natural empathy between us. In our own ways, after India's independence and in French post-war revival, we put great premium on achieving self-reliance. This was driven by a faith in ourselves, as well as an assessment of the global order. Our efforts were also aimed at making greater contribution to global good. The exercise of sovereignty and building of strategic autonomy went hand in hand. That approach has a new relevance today, given the dangers posed by centralized globalization and vulnerable supply chains. Indeed, those with a similar outlook can collaborate to enhance trust and transparency in the global economy, thereby de-risking it significantly. India has regarded France as a global power for a variety of reasons. Obviously, one of them is a permanent seat in the UN Security Council. But in addition, France had a footprint and an influence in far corners of the world and weighed in on key global issues. What was noteworthy was that despite being a member of an alliance, France has never hesitated to voice its own positions. And it has done so with an ideal mix of understanding and realism. This lack of dogmatism has contributed to building a strong partnership with a rising power like India. We saw that, for example, when it came to a complex issue like accommodating India in the global nuclear order. The third way that France long symbolized has naturally been of interest to an India that was devising its own path in global affairs. During the Cold War era of a divided world, this flexibility expanded the basis for our cooperation. Bluntly put, this came without ideological baggage. That tradition has now taken on a more modern incarnation. Indeed, the independent strands that we each represented have become building blocks of the multipolar world. The trust that we have built over the years is an outcome of a similar outlook, national beliefs, and an appreciation of the importance of our relationship. From a strategic point of view, that is expressed in cooperation in defense, space, and civil nuclear energy. These domains have witnessed shared endeavors for many decades, but have now increased in depth and in complexity. In the area of defense, our first acquisition of French fighter aircraft was in the early 1950s. Since then, succeeding generations of French aircraft and other platforms and equipment have been an integral part of the Indian military force. India, therefore, has a strong reason to see France as a critical partner for its national security. France was also an important influence in the development of India's strategic thinking, especially its nuclear force posture. Indeed, the very concept of credible minimum deterrence was derived from the learnings of French experience. Not just that, after the 1998 nuclear tests, France was the first nuclear power to show an understanding of our strategic compulsions. So it was no surprise that Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee made Paris his first bilateral stop after the nuclear tests. Along with President Chirac, he launched the strategic partnership between our two countries that still serves us well today. French support played an important role in India getting an exemption from the nuclear suppliers group in 2008 to resume international cooperation in civil nuclear energy. In the UN Security Council and other international forums, where competing and complex sets of interests affect choices of members, France has been reliable strong, and a consistent partner of India. For our synergies have enabled us, for example, to be more effective in mobilizing UN action against terrorism and terrorist groups. In the past few years, the uncertainties and disequilibrium of a world in transition have encouraged a stronger sense of common strategic purpose. Let me highlight now some of the contemporary drivers of this partnership. One is the future of the Indo-Pacific region, where the center of gravity of global opportunities and challenges increasingly lie. Developments there and ensuing regional order will have a direct impact across the world, including here in Europe. What is at stake is the credibility of a rules-based order and the efficacy of the international system. India is at the strategic center of this region. France represents its two bookends with a vast EEZ. India sees France as a resident power in the Indo-Pacific region, vital for its peace and stability, and a premier partner for India. We both seek a free, open, and inclusive region, and we both have multiple interlinked partnerships with a positive agenda to address the challenges and advance stability and security in the region. Our partnership has multiple objectives. It aims to ensure that we can safeguard our interests, including the security of the sea lanes, freedom of navigation, and the protection of the marine commons. We also work together and with others with stakes in the region to uphold international law and support the organic evolution of a rules-based regional architecture. Our cooperation also intends to create better options to countries in the region and enable them to make sovereign and free choices. They should neither be subjected to domination nor caught in a binary power rivalry. For that, our partnership in trade, investment, and connectivity, health, and sustainability will matter as much as our cooperation in defense and security. For these reasons, we also welcome the EU's strategy for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific region and appreciate deeply French leadership in encouraging and shaping a deep, comprehensive EU engagement with the Indo-Pacific. India and France pursue their Indo-Pacific partnership through multiple channels. We work together bilaterally on regional security, economic, and sustainability issues. We appreciate that France will chair one of the pillars of India's Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative. We are evolving plurilateral interlinked arrangements with strategic partners. This is visible in regional forums, including the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium, the Indian Ocean Regional Association, the Indian Ocean Commission, and in regional information fusion centers. It also extends to ASEAN-based institutions. Another important strategic objective in our relationship is to work for a reformed and effective multilateralism. This is critical for India and France to achieve our ambitions and fulfill our aspirations. French support for the reform of the UN Security Council, including India's permanent membership, has been strong. We recognize that to strengthen multilateralism, faith and confidence in it must be restored. That is why India and France attach high importance to multilateral efforts for a quick and equitable delivery of COVID vaccines, addressing inequality, poverty, unemployment, and indebtedness, and meeting the challenges of climate change and biodiversity conservation. The world we want to see reflects the society we wish to build. Multilateralism is more than just institutions. It is a way of dealing with emerging challenges, both within and outside multilateral institutions. Both India and France prefer collective, consultative, and inclusive approaches over unilateral initiatives. The India-France-led International Solar Alliance, which now has nearly 100 members, is an example. Whether it is climate change, disaster-resilient infrastructure, conservation of forests, illegal fishing, or ban on single-use plastic, our two countries have always reached out to each other to create a participative global movement. Coming from two different parts of the world, with our own development journeys, and with the capacity to mobilize participation around initiatives, India and France can do much together. By working with third parties and focused groupings, they promote plurilateralism that is so reflective of our times. Along with that, they strengthen multilateralism and together help create a stable multipolar order. The third priority is in the digital domain. Digital technology will be an important determinant of our sovereignty, leadership, competitiveness, and international relations in this century. Our two countries have advanced skills and technology, a high level of complementarity, similar thinking on creating a sovereign ecosystem, and convergent views on data standards and security. Above all, we have the vital ingredients of trust and democratic values. India is already the third largest startup ecosystem in the world and a leader in creating public digital infrastructure. It offers scale and sophistication that can create productive partnerships for the next generation digital and telecommunication capabilities and standards. Our mutual trust also opens vast opportunities for cooperation in cybersecurity. And together, we can also extend India's transformative use of the digital infrastructure to change the lives of our people and support inclusive development elsewhere. A fourth area is the economy. A multipolar world order requires a multipolar economic order. The pandemic has laid bare the concentration risk in international trade. Supply chains have become tools of political coercion. The prospect of technology decoupling look real, even if they are in limited sectors. Therefore, building resilient and safe supply chains have become a national priority around the world and a key area of focus in international relations. France has been an important bridge for us to the European Union. A key expectation today is French support for the launch of negotiations between India and the EU on trade and investments. A trusted corridor between EU and India will enhance economic opportunities for both and serve our shared interest in a resilient and assured supply chain. There are two areas of national interest for India where we look forward to France as a key partner. One is in the realm of defense and security. We see France as a trusted collaborator in countering security challenges from seabed to space, from cyber to oceans. France is also among the foremost countries as India seeks to build industrial self-reliance in the defense sector with a sense of urgency and priority. In this, we draw inspiration from the national self-sufficiency France has itself built. Naturally, given the history of our defense partnership, we are exploring ambitious ideas for collaborative ventures in India. This will support our common interests in the Indo-Pacific region as well. The other area is the transformation of our industrial sector. Like France, India too saw the erosion of its industrial base, and like France, we are determined to restore it, especially with emphasis on the industries of the future. The Indian economy is experiencing a strong rebound with a growth of 9.2%. Rapid expansion of infrastructure is being accompanied by sustained reforms in the business environment and attractive production-linked incentives in 13 sectors. The political comfort and trust in our relationship adds to the attractiveness of India for French businesses. To sum up, therefore, The agenda of our partnership is truly extensive. So whether it is India's own national transformation agenda or the future of the Indo-Pacific region and its maritime commons, the advancement of plurilateralism or the reform of multilateralism, or indeed addressing global challenges, we count on France as amongst our most important partners. Over the past 2 years, despite the constraints of the pandemic, we have maintained an intense and wide-ranging bilateral engagement. It is not difficult for either of us to enter new territories of cooperation because of trust and transparency, the comfort of consistency in our relations, and the belief in independent thinking and action. I'm confident that as we both go forward, this partnership will be a strong asset for our countries and the global order that we both wish to see. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to the discussion.
Yeah, you deserve water. Thank you very much, Minister, for this very comprehensive speech. I have noted 6 points to sum up. First of all, the trust and confidence between France and India, which is deeply rooted in history. You have insisted on the strategic partnership, especially the discussion, the dialogue on nuclear issues since many decades now. You were in Paris for this Indo-Pacific Forum, and there is a huge expectation on both sides to develop cooperation. There is this importance you underlined for the reform of multilateralism. There is a very important, interesting point about also your expectation in terms of technologies and the fact that we entered the digital age with huge opportunities, certainly, to cooperate between both countries. And you have finished by presenting also France as a bridge for India towards the EU, and it's a point certainly on which we'll be back on the discussion. Let me start with 2 questions, if I may, before giving the floor to Sylvie. And I see also in the discussion, in the line of the discussion, that there are some questions on this issue. You are in Paris, and in Paris in last September, there was very strong reaction to a decision taken between Washington, between the US, Australia, and the UK to create the so-called AUKUS. There are some consequences for France, as anyone knows. But given the importance you have underlined for the strategic relations between France and India, I would be curious to know what was your reaction regarding AUKUS, and to what extent, in your views, AUKUS contributes to a better stability in the Indo-Pacific region.
Well, that's certainly a tricky start. Actually, I remember that period because it so happened by coincidence. I just had a visit from the Australian Foreign Minister, and then I went to the UN General Assembly, and my first meeting was with Minister Le Drian. So in a sense, I sort of accidentally walked into this matter. And, honestly, it's a very difficult issue for non-participants to have a view, because I've read, like anybody interested in the matter, what the Australians said, what was said by the French leadership as well. So, for us, what is important is that democratic countries, countries which share the values and interests that we do ourselves, that we would like obviously to see a sort of a cooperative spirit and an ability to work together among them. So it's for completely understandable reasons, and it's in diplomacy, one of the first things you learn, or you should learn, is to be very careful about articulating opinions on matters on which you don't necessarily have a inside view. So AUKUS, I think, would fall very much in that category. What I can certainly say is, from an Indian perspective, we do value our relationship. With France, it goes without saying. That is the subject of my lecture. But equally with the US and with Australia, because they are Quad partners for us today.
So my second question is partly in line with the first one, but only partly. You started your presentation by explaining that all of us face multiple crises, and that there is an ongoing crisis right now in Europe. Obviously, I think you were thinking about Ukraine. The French diplomacy was very active in the crisis between Russia and Ukraine. And also the French diplomacy was active to defend the principle of freedom of navigation in China Sea and follow very carefully the relation between China and Taiwan at the time being, for instance. So my question is, would you connect these two theaters, these two crises? I mean, the one around Taiwan and the one in Europe right now between Russia and Ukraine. Do you think that is something in terms of analysis which should be connected, or do you think it's completely disconnected?
I mean, look, you can take the view everything in the world is connected, okay? But when you either do international relations analysis or you practice diplomacy, you come very quickly to appreciate that different problems have different histories, different contexts, different players, and transposing issues of one theater to another is often, honestly, can be misleading. As someone, say, at the moment, as a country in the Indo-Pacific, for us, the problems in the Indo-Pacific are quite unique. In fact, today we had this Indo-Pacific Ministerial Forum, and I was among the speakers who spoke at the plenary, but then we had a discussion. And a point which I made particularly to the European ministers who were present, I said, you must be very conscious of the fact the Indo-Pacific is not Europe. It sounds very obvious, but when you hear people's remarks, I give you some examples. I mean, Europe, for example, has settled boundaries. There are very serious territorial disputes still there in Asia. Europe has a regional architecture, however imperfect it may be. That is not the case with Asia. Europe, the global commons around Europe is really not a subject for stress in the manner in which it is in Asia. So I think, I completely get it. The world is globalized. There are, common patterns. But once you get into serious analysis, you're making judgments, you're formulating policy conclusions, I think it's very important to be quite specific about it, because there are interests at play in every region. And at the end of the day, policies are some kind of balance between beliefs and interests. So that's why the transposition, quite honestly, leaves me uncomfortable.
Before moving to Syria, it would be interesting to know if we try to be specific, how would you analyze the situation around Taiwan, and how would you analyze the situation around Ukraine?
Well, as I said, both are products of very complex histories of that, particular region. In the case of Ukraine, a lot of it derives from the post-Soviet politics, the expansion of NATO, the dynamics between Russia and Europe and Russia and the West broadly. So those would all be the variables in that. In the case of Taiwan, I think it's a product of what happened in Chinese history and what happened in the way, the Cold War and other developments played out in Asia. And, if you look at the history of the last 75 years, I think history has taken a very, very different turn in Europe and a very different turn in Asia. And particularly after 92, for example, a lot of issues, you had the expansion of the European Union. You had, of course, the unification of Germany. You had the expansion of the European Union. And then Europe went on a certain course. Now, you haven't seen, it wasn't that the Cold War, end of the Cold War automatically translated into similar outcomes in Asia. What has really shaped Asia has been much more the autonomous economic growth of Asia, initially of Korea and Taiwan, then of the ASEAN, then of China, and then followed by India. So, again, as I said, look, in international relations, one has to be very careful. If there is one thing the world is not flat. I know it's a great book title and a wonderful one-liner, but if you're actually going to be into serious policy making, that's a very facile assumption.
Sylvie.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take you to Myanmar, where we have a very tragic situation, more than 1 year after the coup, an enormous number of people in jail, among them Aung San Suu Kyi. Where does India stand on this problem? How can you help to find a solution? How do you judge the role of ASEAN, which took this rare initiative of, keeping the junta out of their summit, but then had the Cambodian leader Hun Sen visiting Myanmar? What prospects for improvement do you see, and what role do you think you can play?
Well, I think the starting point for the answer would be to remind you of the obvious, which is that in our region, India is not just the biggest democracy, in a way, it's the most well-established democracy. And it's a democracy which has always been supportive of democratic forces. Not today, over a period of time. I mean, you look at each one of our neighbors, whenever there have been political forces who have tried to assert their democratic rights and interests, there's a natural sympathy for that in India. Now, sometimes, the most, I would say, extreme example would be Bangladesh, where, there were people struggling to in fact, express their democratic rights. They had won an election. They were not allowed to form a party. They wanted a separate nation. They had a different cultural identity. And, we played a big part in helping to secure that. And I take you back to history, because at that time, actually, we found most democratic countries of Europe and North America ranged against that for reasons of Cold War politics. So the fact is, point number one, we have been consistently pro-democracy. Point number two, in reality, people have not always, all democratic countries have not always supported all democracies. Okay. Point number three, in the case of Myanmar, we have a particular involvement because Aung San Suu Kyi, she grew up in India. Her mother was the ambassador. She has a lot of friends. There's a strong support base. I have myself met her a number of times, and it's very easy to relate to her. Now, we were, after the last time the military rule came to an end and the elections were held, NLD came to power, we've actually worked with her and the Myanmar system to strengthen the democratic transition. Now, a year ago, of course, events went a different direction. So like the rest of the world, we also are very clear that the democratic transition should not be derailed, and we would like to urge and encourage that democratic processes be restored. Now, here's the challenge that we face as a neighboring country. One, we share a land border. It's a very complex land border. There are insurgents operating in that land border. And we have to work per force with the security forces of Myanmar to ensure that their borders and our borders are kept under control. Now, we have seen that in the last year, as they have been otherwise preoccupied, there's been a degradation in that, and we've had some serious issues on our border, including actually an ambush which killed a very senior commanding officer of our security forces and his family. So I have a security problem on that border. Secondly, I have a COVID problem on that border because Myanmar is not a well-vaccinated country to the extent they are vaccinated. And by the way, we were one of the countries which gave them vaccines very early on. It didn't travel to the remote area. So we actually have a concern that the border areas are not vaccinated and that COVID there can spread to India. The third, we've had refugees coming over. At one point of time, we could sort of say some of them came over for political reasons, but we have increasingly seen that people are coming over because there seem to be food shortages there. There is a humanitarian problem which is building out there. So for us, deeply wedded as we are to democratic principles, consistent though we have been on support for democratic forces, and I would say our record quite candidly compares favorably with most other countries in the world, we still believe that it is unavoidable to engage the regime currently on matters which are necessary for our interests and our well-being, and in a sense, I would say to their well-being as well, where humanitarian demands are concerned. So we've had contacts with them, not at a political level, at a sort of, you can say, somebody bureaucratic from my side went there, in fact, our foreign secretary. We have supplied them vaccines. We have discussed, I think we have now supplied them food as well. We do discuss how to secure the border. And we have been very supportive of the ASEAN initiative. I was in touch with the Brunei Foreign Minister, Erivan, earlier. I speak to in fact, to all of them, to the Cambodian, to the Thai, to the Singaporean. And we all agreed that we don't want too many attempts, because then they will be played off against each other. So if the ASEAN has the lead, then it's better that other countries, who have similar objectives, come in behind the ASEAN effort. So that's really what we are trying to do. So I do think Myanmar is a situation where it's natural for a neighboring country to have some engagement and some dealings and offer some support on certain areas like COVID or food. But that all that needs to be balanced with, I would say, commitment to the restoration of the democratic transition.
Another easy situation, Afghanistan. What is your view of what should be done? Should the assets be given back, or how should they be destroyed? There's obviously a humanitarian crisis also. What should democratic countries do to deal with this regime and not punish the population without, having too close, without appearing supportive of the Taliban?
Well, look, again, I think this is a very complicated issue. And these are really the dilemmas of international relations. I mean, where it's not easy to make those tough choices. How do you allow your discomfort or antipathy to a outfit like Taliban to get in your way of offering support to people who are obviously suffering very, very deeply? So I think these are the dilemmas, and in a way, I mean, it's very interesting if you look at it. In Afghanistan and Myanmar, many of the countries who urge pragmatism and realism in Afghanistan have a very different view of Myanmar. So clearly, in a sense, that what your interests are often stronger than what your beliefs are. They are tailored to where it is, and I do know that in many cases the concern about Afghanistan is driven by the fear of refugees coming from Afghanistan to Europe. But what should we do about Afghanistan? I would say we should find ways of definitely helping the Afghan people, and we have to do that in a way in which we are comfortable with our own assessment of the Taliban and the regime out there. Now, we have UN Security Council resolution, which was actually passed during our chairship of the Security Council in August last year, which urged a more inclusive Afghan regime, which wanted the rights of minorities, women, children to be respected, which wanted no shelter to be given to terrorists, which wanted Afghans who wanted to leave the country to be allowed to leave the country. So these did capture the broad thinking of the international community. Now, we have not seen much progress in it in the last few months, but do we then say, because we didn't get progress, do we just leave that country alone? I don't think we can do that. So where we are concerned, we have taken two big steps. One, we have provided medicines, because in Afghanistan, Indian medicines historically have been used very, very widely. So we have shipped medicines from India to the main hospital in Kabul. So in that sense, we are dealing with a hospital. We are not dealing with a government, you can say. And also, today, as we speak, our first wheat shipments are taking place to Afghanistan. We have committed to give them 50,000 tons of wheat. I think that would make us the largest donor. We've struggled with it because for I think 3 months, we had to negotiate with Pakistan for transit, but finally they have agreed. So the bottom line is we have to devise a strategy where we help the people and find ways of figuring out what we do with the regime.
Just to finish on this issue, and then I leave the floor to Françoise. Was the United States right to withdraw? Or to take this decision when they took it?
Again, it's not that I'm dodging your question. It is, I am very careful passing judgment on somebody else. Partly, as I said, because you have to understand all their compulsions and their situation. I mean, bear in mind they've been there for 20 years, and a 20-year military commitment is an extraordinary commitment. I mean, there are very few countries in the world today who can sustain that kind of commitment, and I do think While I said, in a sense, you're asking me whether right in leaving, I would ask you to look at the fact that they did stay there for 20 years. But you look at American politics, you look at what it has done in a sense to America's strategic posture. I would say, it was coming. It was coming. And while people attribute it to the Biden administration, I remind you, this actually started the debate which started under Obama. The decision to leave was made under Obama. So in fact, what is often left out in debates was how long it took America to close out that debate about withdrawing. So it started Obama's second term, went through entire Trump term before it ended up on the Biden watch.
So just before to give you the floor, just to explain the rules for the third part, after your questions and your answer, Minister, I will ask Isabelle Saint-Mézard, David Camroux, and Jean-Luc Racine to raise their respective questions. Françoise, that's your turn.
Thank you, Thomas. So, Mr. Minister, I won't force you to provide assessments about other people's actions.
Judgments.
Or judgments.
Judgments.
So I will ask you about India's foreign policy. So my first question is about the Quad.
Mm-hmm.
The Quad has changed substantially ever since it came into existence. And you participated very recently, I think, to a summit down under. And so my question is a very simple one. What is exactly the significance of the Quad from India's perspective? And what is India getting at by participating in this group?
You've come to the right person in asking this question. And there's a reason why I'm telling you this. The origins of the Quad actually go back to 2004. We had this tsunami then, and the Quad countries actually coordinated. At that time, we also, by the way, had the European Union there, which had a naval presence in India at that point of time. And we actually coordinated our response to the tsunami. And we discovered at that time that coordination made a big difference because it enabled us to back each other up and get relief and support across to people in a much more effective way than had we gone it alone. Now, after 2004, I think the experience was a good one, so people kind of mulled over it. Then in 2007, Prime Minister Abe, who had just become Prime Minister then first time, he proposed saying, look, why don't we look at it in terms of something more regular and recurring? So there was an official meeting, but I think there wasn't enough of a buy-in. There was no, perhaps people didn't see that much of a value in it in 2007. So really from 2007 to 2017, it wasn't there. Okay. Then we picked up again 10 years later in 2017, first at the foreign ministers level. Actually foreign secretaries level, like the Secretary General's level, you can say. Then 2019, 2 years later, it got elevated to the foreign ministers level, and 2 years later to the leaders level. Now, what did we see in it, and what is in it for India? I think what is in it from India is exactly what we first saw in it in 2004, which is if there are global challenges, even regional challenges, and it is of an nature that one country cannot handle it by itself. And there are 4 countries who are comfortable with each other, who by working with each other can actually kind of take it to x to the power 4. You actually get very much better results. So in a sense, I would say it's like a kind of a global good organization, because we did see genuine global challenges out there, and I'll give you some examples of that. So the thinking behind Quad was that, 4 of us comfortable with each other, strong bilateral relations. And in a sense, 3 of them, the US actually has treaties with Japan and Australia. So we were the one country which was a non-treaty, non-alliance country. So, but in my view, the success or the ability of the Quad to happen was in this period, in the last 2 decades, especially in the last decade, or the India-Japan, India-Australia, India-US relations have become so strong that it today brings us all on a much more even level than it would do otherwise. I think 10 years ago, probably those relationships were of a different level and our relationships were at a much lower quality or level. Now, what do we do? What is the value in it? I'll just give you some examples. You spoke about our meeting in Australia. We are, for example, today very, very focused on vaccines because we want to deliver vaccines without, any politics to it. And we found the best way of doing that was to see if American vaccines could be produced in India and financed and distributed by not just the US and India, but also by Australia and Japan. And we have committed this year to producing 1 billion vaccines and distributing it in the Indo-Pacific. A second example I could give you is connectivity. That again, all of us share the view that connectivity should not have a political agenda. It should be market-driven. It should be transparent, and we'd like to see whether in a way can we coordinate our connectivity efforts so that we make for a much more I would say develop the region, but in a way in which it is very open and inclusive. Another area is, well, 2 areas which are reflective of the COVID challenges and the digital era, the need for reliable, resilient supply chains, the idea of critical and emerging technologies, 5G, 6G, that these should be trusted and transparent. Now, these are all areas where there's a natural convergence of our interests and of our views. It could even actually extend interestingly, we even agreed on STEM fellowships because we saw that we have a common interest in actually promoting exchanges of students. So there's actually a Quad STEM fellowship in the making. So what you should expect from Quad is a lot of activity in sort of, I would say, on global issues and global commons, where the expectation that the United States will continue to do everything for everybody is no longer tenable. So in a way, you could say the Quad represents the consequence of American strategic contraction. I mean, we discussed Afghanistan as a situation, but the United States, if you see today the American debate of foreign policy for the middle class about forever, the mood against forever wars, the suspicion of open-ended commitments. So if the premier power of our times decides that it cannot keep doing what it has been doing for the last 80 years, then I think the rest of us have to do something or just throw up our hands. So in the Quad, some of us decided to do something about it. And that's really what it is about.
Okay, thank you. So let me now bring you to my own area of expertise, which is economics. So it seems to me that there has been a major change in India's position, in particular vis-a-vis FTAs, free trade agreements. I remember asking you this very same question last year. Why did India pull out of RCEP?
I have a better answer.
So this will not be the exact question this time. No, I remember that you said that India had a commitment to free trade, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, but what we saw at the time was that India was not particularly active with FTAs. India had pulled out of the RCEP negotiation. The EU-India negotiation was stalled.
Not due to us.
And yeah,
but
and you said this is feet dragging on the EU side, et cetera, et cetera.
I still say that.
Okay, fine. So I knew that you would say so. So I anticipated that. But what we see is that India now is super active with FTAs. So India has engaged in a negotiation with the UAE.
No, we've concluded.
And in no time, at speed of light,
Yes.
the agreement was completed.
Yes.
So in less than 3 months,
Correct.
usually it's 3 years, but 3 months. So that's really, really amazing. India also engaged in a negotiation with Australia, and so it's about to actually, sign an early harvest agreement with Australia. And the EU-India negotiation is back on track. So my question is, what has changed? What is the factor that made you change your mind? Because I still think that India was a little bit passive or reluctant to engage in FTA negotiations until early last year.
Well, I'd put it this way. First of all, I don't think RCEP was a representative sample of our overall foreign trade thinking. At the risk of belaboring the point, we again come down to specifics, okay? Which is because we didn't go through with RCEP, doesn't therefore mean that we won't go through with other FTAs. So that transposition applies to trade as well as it does to strategy. We had, quite honestly, very specific concerns about the RCEP, and those we were very open in the concluding phases of the RCEP with our other negotiating partners. And we made it very clear that if we had to go forward, they had to find some way of addressing those concerns, and they couldn't. Now, it happens in life. From our point of view, that's done and dusted, okay? Now, when we looked at the rest of the world, we've actually, frankly, have been, I can tell you from personal experience, we've been talking the BTIA, which is the European FTA, from 2015. I've been in the room since, from 2015 when Prime Minister Modi raised it with his counterparts in Brussels. There was, at that time, I would say maybe Brussels was preoccupied with other negotiations they were running. So everybody again prioritizes things in life. So that was the way it was. So we did finally get a change of position on the part of EU at the Porto summit last May and during the Portuguese presidency. And, I give a lot of credit to all the 27 leaders, but I think the Portuguese presidency also made a huge effort to see that we could get that done. So the leaders actually then gave kind of fresh instructions to the system saying, look, why don't you people go back to the negotiating table? And since then, there's been some activity, despite COVID has been a bit of an obstacle, but we've carried on. In the meanwhile, actually, UAE came up. And again, I want to tell you there's a reason why UAE came up, because what the COVID did in a way was during the Gulf generally, UAE specifically, is enormously reliant on us for very basic supplies. A lot of the food, the meat, the vegetables, all of that comes from India. And they realized during the COVID that we had gone the extra mile to, even during our lockdown, in ensuring that those supply chains were kept open. I think coming out of the COVID, there was a sharper realization of the value of this relationship and of the, I would say, the need for stability and predictability in this relationship. So the good experiences during the stress time of COVID kind of created a tailwind for the rapid movement with the UAE. We, by the way, also have decided, and in fact, negotiations have started to do an FTA with Israel. That Israel, there's a lot of innovation, there's a lot of technology out there. unrelated point, just so that I flag it for your attention and those of your listeners. We have a grouping, by the way, which we started last year of US, India, Israel, and UAE. So that's a sort of a grouping in the making with a strong economic focus, but that's in brackets for your information. Another country with which we have moved forward is UK. So the UK has sort of shown a lot of interest, and I think we've had some very strong negotiating sessions. So, an FTA is never done till it's done, and we know that by hard experience. So I'm not predicting when it's done, but definitely I can, say, compared to the last time when you asked me the question and I said, don't take it as a closed position on FTAs and foreign trade. I think I can assert that with a little bit more validity a year from then.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. I will now turn to the listeners by starting with Isabelle Saint-Mézard, and we will gather the questions to give you the chance to respond and to respect the timing. So Isabelle Saint-Mézard, after that, David Camroux, Jean-Luc Racine, and Abhijit Chandari for the first round. We will see if you have time for a second one. So Isabelle, it's you now.
All right. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to ask a question. My question is about the current crisis between India and China over the border. And I would like to know, in your view, what are the prospects for finding a solution to the current border crisis, and for disengaging from the border areas? Are you reasonably optimistic, or do you think that both India and China are in this border crisis for the long haul? Thank you.
Thank you, Isabelle. I turn now to David Camroux. David, it's over to you.
I'm not sure if you can hear me, but
yes, it's okay. That's
okay.
fine.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. You've already partly answered my question. It concerns Myanmar. You mentioned that, like the Europeans, India was counting a lot on ASEAN and the implementation of the ASEAN 5-point consensus. It seems that this is now a dead end. Just yesterday or the day before, the junta refused to allow the special envoy to meet with the representatives of the democratic opposition. We are now in a civil war situation, which is becoming bloodier and bloodier. There have been calls for a no-flight zone because the only advantage basically the military has is their air superiority, in order to level the playing field between the ethnic armed groups, the PDF and the Tatmadaw. There have been calls for a no-flight zone, which would obviously require the participation of neighboring countries, India and Thailand. What is your position on that?
Thank you. I turn now to Jean-Luc Racine. Jean-Luc, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Is it okay?
It's fine.
Okay. Mr. Minister, considering the geometry of international meetings which have followed the Taliban return to power, particularly the format Neighbor plus Russia, which has been held in Tehran last October, considering the new security relationship between Russia and Pakistan, the upgraded relation between Iran and China, the visit of Iranian president to Moscow last month, and the coming visit tomorrow, if not wrong, to Moscow also of Pakistan Prime Minister, considering finally the Putin-Xi Jinping joint declaration early February, do you believe that we may ask whether some sort of an informal second Quad, an Eurasian one, this one, is under construction between China, Russia, Iran, and Pakistan? Is it a point which has been discussed or intact when President Putin visited New Delhi last December, or within the new 2+2 dialogue established between India and Russia? Thank you.
Thank you, Jean-Luc, for this question of geometry, which is really important. I turn now for this first one to Abhijit Chandari. The floor is yours.
Hi, I don't know if you can hear me.
That's fine.
Yeah, okay. First of all, thank you for all the panelists, for all the questions and the insights that you have given us. My question is a fairly simple one to both the sides of the conversation. We are talking about big strategic partnerships, but what would be the effects that, you know, a common man, a French common man who's traveling to India, or an Indian who's living in France, what are the developments, what are the cooperations that we can see enveloping or coming in the future for the in that direction? I would like to know.
Thank you very much. Minister, you have a good set of questions, so you can go. If you have time, we will take a second one, but you can deal with this one.
Let me start with the first question. Am I optimistic about the disengagement prospects between India and China? My answer is I'm optimistic, full stop. I'm optimistic temperamentally, because if you are into diplomacy and negotiations, it is completely necessary you're optimistic, because that is the only way you never give up. So where the particular issue is concerned, we've had 13 rounds of discussions by military commanders focused on the disengagement issue. As a result of that, we've made significant headway in many of the friction points. There are some friction points which still remain to be resolved. It has its complexity. It has its complexity because these are areas where there are claims, and then there are various military considerations which become the subject of the conversation. But here's the clarity with which we are approaching it. We are absolutely clear that we will not agree to any change in the status quo, any attempt to change the line of actual control unilaterally by one side. So however complex it is, however long it takes, however difficult it is, I think that clarity is what guides us. I would say, other than optimism, it's very important also to have perseverance. So believe me, I've got those qualities in reasonable measure, and my system has it in reasonable measure, which is more important. So we will carry on with this, and that disengagement is right now the goal, because it's only when disengagement happens that we can then start talking about de-escalation. Regarding the Myanmar question, I would say, honestly, I was quite perplexed by some of what you said, because you are sort of making some very sweeping assumptions there that things have reached a dead end, that, the ASEAN initiative, the special envoy, is not going to work. And I've not even heard anybody serious talk about concepts like no-fly zone. So again, I want to take some of my optimism at least into the Myanmar account as well. Look, difficult things happen in international relations. That's why you have diplomats, you have negotiators, you have people whose mission in life is to find ways of improving the international landscape. So people don't give up that easily because one particular initiative didn't work or one visit wasn't successful. I know my ASEAN colleagues well. I know them personally. I know they are very strongly committed to seeing what, they will do everything they can to try and make headway in Myanmar. So I would urge you not to write off the efforts as confidently as your question would suggest. On the geometry question, that was an interesting one because, you know, four corners do not necessarily make a geometry. You can have, you know, all that you said was true. I mean, Russia is dealing with Pakistan, Iran is dealing with China, Iran is dealing with Russia. There was a China-Russia summit, all completely true. But, you know, in a sense, what your question would suggest is like 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 is 1,111. So I would say it takes much more. And I say this out of experience, you know. I've seen for, you know, we were speaking earlier about the Quad. What does it take to put a Quad-like body together? It takes a lot of comfort. It takes a lot of systemic interaction. It takes strong leadership commitment. It's only when all those things are there that actually some kind of grouping, the geometry actually begins to form. And even in Quad, the reason the geometry didn't work earlier was because all those ingredients were not there. So I would, on geometry, say aggregating interactions does not automatically lead to a geometry. It takes something more. There is a further catalyst or a higher upgrade there that is required. And by the way, interestingly, with many of these countries, you know, I'm now speaking for India, we are also discussing Afghanistan. So by some of your logic, even we could end up with a geography. And, you know, if you add a fifth factor, you know what the geography could be called. So I would therefore sort of enter a note of caution there. Finally, that the last question, you know, what does it mean to a common man? You know, that's a really interesting question because it's something I'm working on to speak at some point of time to my own home audience, which is we discuss foreign policy, we discuss, you know, strategy, geometry, how chemistry, transposition. At the end of the day, I think the street judges the quality of foreign policy by what is it which they get in their daily lives. I mean, I would say if I were to speak today in India, certainly people would say an Indian going out of India gets much stronger support. I mean, there is a clear sense that the Indian government, have their back as they go out. And even during COVID, for example, when a lot of people got stuck, we actually brought back 7 million people by air and by ship back to India. So it could be times of distress, it could be visa issues, it could be mobility, it could be work opportunities. So there is a lot that today a common man can benefit from India, you know, stronger relations between India and France. But if I mean, to my mind, certainly I would say because I spoke about a technology partnership and a digital partnership, to me, that could really actually mean more business, more employment, more work opportunities, more talent innovation movement, maybe more scaling up of startups. So a large part of what we are now trying to do, I mean, we call it in a sense a sort of a development-centered, people-centric foreign policy. So I think there is a kind of a change in the way in which you look at foreign policy itself.
Minister, I think we can try to, if you would agree, to take 4 more questions. Quickly, concise, quick. Alors 3. If that's for the listeners, they are very disappointed. Okay, let's go for 3. Jean-François Bureau, Monica Michel, and Rajaram Mohan. So Jean-François, the floor is yours, and you have understand there is a need to be short.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Minister, for your presentation and answers. My question would be, how do you assess the terrorist risk India could face following the regime change in Afghanistan? Would you see a change in the way you assess the risks?
I turn now to Rajaram Mohan, and after that to Mrs. Monica Michel. So Rajaram Mohan.
Good evening, Minister. I don't know if you can hear me.
That's fine.
Okay. I just have a simple question. How you plan to enhance the role of Indian diaspora present in France to promote a better relationship between France and India?
And last question, Madame la députée, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation and for taking my question, Minister. As a French member of Parliament, member of the Defense Commission, I recently had the pleasure to lead an information mission in respect of defense challenges in the Indo-Pacific region. The report was publicly presented last week and should be published soon. With my colleague, Laurence Pastorisla, we organized many auditions, as you can imagine, and had the chance last May to discuss with your Indian ambassador in France, Mr. Jawad Ashraf. It was said that India is one of France's major partners in the region as a democracy that shares an inclusive vision of international relations. Indeed, France and India share common views and apply them through shared operational exercises in the nation. I have in mind such exercises as Varuna, Garuda, and Shakti. I would like, Minister, to understand how those exercises were assessed on the Indian side and also have your vision on the evolution of our military relationship in the future. Sorry for this lengthy question. Thank you very much.
So, Minister, you have 4 minutes.
Yes. Okay. Look, very quickly on Afghanistan, I think I made the point earlier as well. The international community, not just India, the international community has concerns about the presence of foreign fighters in Afghanistan, about the presence of terrorist organizations. And I think a lot of countries are looking very carefully at what is happening in Afghanistan to see whether after the Taliban has started ruling, whether there's any change there. And I think the jury is still out in terms of whether there is change or not. I don't think anybody has credibly advanced any information to suggest that there is an improvement. So the concern per se about Afghan soil being used, I think is still a very live concern. The second issue, diaspora. I think diaspora definitely has a growing role in terms of bridging India and the world. And that role is partly because the conduct and the achievement of the diaspora in many ways defines the image of a country in the society where they live. And I would certainly say India has benefited enormously, that the high achievers of the diaspora have created a different image for India. And I have seen it in the course of my own professional lifetime. And what can you do specifically in France? I would say you could certainly open up more windows. You could help bring in the field of culture in terms of people-to-people relations. There are a lot of, I would say, cultural-driven activities. I mean, if you were to look, one of the priorities of our government right now is to find a way of rapidly and massively expanding tourism. Now, that's a kind of area where certainly the presence of the diaspora, the role of the diaspora can make a difference. The third issue was the military, a kind of a report card on the military. Look, this has been a great area of cooperation between our two countries. Over a long time, as I said, starting, I think, from 1953 or 54. But the defense side of our cooperation has been a real pillar of strength. And it's reflected, I mean, people tend to talk, when you talk defense, to talk of equipment. But there's much more to it. There is, a real strong defense relationship means exercises, means policy sort of exchanges. It means training. So I have a very positive view, because I also think that the French military and the French system has made a bigger effort to understand what is happening in India than probably most of our other major partners. I mean, I say this not to flatter you, and because I want to say India sees France positively. I'm actually saying that if you look at many of our changes, because some of our changes today are adjusted to a new industrial policy, to some very specific requirements which India has, given the nature of India's strategic posture. And I think the French system has been very nimble in sort of meeting that. And I credit the fact that we have a strong defense relationship partly to that. So, I'm glad in a way you asked me that question, because it enables me once again to reiterate the theme of my talk, that India sees France in very positive terms, as a trusted partner, as a country with whom we will work to pursue a larger regional and global agenda.
Thank you, Minister. Before concluding our session, I would like to express 4 thanks. The very first one is for Ambassador Ashraf and his team, because it was a real pleasure to organize this event with you. The second one is for Sylvie, Françoise, and the listeners for their very relevant questions, as usual. The third thanks is for IFRI's team, because it's not always easy to organize in the time being hybrid events. So it was very, very well done. Thank you. And the last one is for you, Minister, because it was your first time at IFRI. I do hope there will be a second time, maybe a third time. You know that given the importance of the relation between India and France, there will be certainly new opportunities to visit Paris. And please, next time, make a stop to continue this discussion. Thank you very much, and see you soon.